Welcome to the Law, Your Money, and You. This is a continuing series on the effects of the coronavirus, and we're so lucky to have with us today our friend and accountant, and he's been on before, and he's brilliant, but I'm not going to introduce him yet because I got to introduce myself, Roberta Saphire, an attorney in Sharon, Massachusetts, and my co-host.
And cohort, I'm Camille, a healthcare advisor and financial coordinator, also in Sharon, Mass. And yes, we have a guest returning today who's just been a source of information for us on so many issues related to finance and tax information. And he's here to talk to us more today about the effects of the coronavirus when it comes to people's finances and tax considerations.
And businesses too, because you represent a lot of businesses, but you must have, this is Alan Lury, by the way. Hi, Alan, wave.
Hi.
And he's going to tell us about what's happening to people and if there's a cure, et cetera, et cetera. Go for it, Alan.
Okay, well, it's been a very hectic last 6 or 7 weeks with the coronavirus, and effectively we've had about a significant amount of tax changes and loan programs, and the biggest one being, of course, the PPP program, which is the program that is has the debt forgiveness feature in it, that approximately $600 billion has been funded in 2 rounds of funding by the government. And
what does the PP stand for? The PPP.
Payroll Protection Plan.
Yeah, because some people think it's Planned Parenthood.
No. Payroll Protection Plan. And I've worked with a number of my clients to have obtained money through the SBA. It's an SBA program that's run through banks. And, it took up a good part of my time during the month of April as people rushed to get this money. And it's a very interesting process because of the fact that it's a good program. It's a pretty restrictive program how they've set it up, and unfortunately, they made changes while the program's been running, and prior to introduction, while it's been running, and going forward, there'll be more changes. But effectively, it's allowed small businesses to go out and obtain funding based upon their 2019 payroll times 2.5%, the average monthly payroll in 2019 times 2.5, to come up with the total dollar amount that they would be able to borrow from the SBA. Then what happens is from the point they receive the money through a 60-day period that ends on June 30th, they have to spend 75% of that money on payroll. If they're able to do that, then that 75% is forgiven. And the other 25% can only be spent on rent and utilities and interest expense on debt incurred prior to February 15th of 2020. And if they are able to achieve that as well, then the full amount is forgivable. Effectively is a process that the banks will come in and review your documentation after June 30th, and they will then sign off on the forgiveness of debt, and then the company can proceed. However, there's been lots of issues with this, and one of the interesting ones that now is coming out is whether or not this forgiveness of debt, which the SBA and the IRS, what the IRS has said is not taxable income. But on the other hand, they've also said that the expenses incurred are non-deductible as well. So if you received a $60,000 loan and you spent it all correctly and it could be forgiven, you don't recognize the income of $60,000. But on the other hand, you can't deduct the expenses of the $60,000. Now, the American Institute of CPAs is come back, and they're very vigorously this week, and they've come back and saying that was not the intention of the law. The intention was that you'd have no income on the debt forgiveness, but you could still deduct those expenses. So we will not know what will happen there for a while as far as that, and that's a big issue.
How large are your companies? Do you go
I've had
like a 2-man or 20-man or 50-man or 100?
No, I've had I have clients that have a couple of clients that have received close to $500,000 in financing. So all the way down to $25,000 in financing. So it's a fairly large broad range there of clients that have received funds. Now, the other issue, and this is one that this was rather, I don't know if it was poor planning or just not foresight as far as how individuals think about money, is that my clients who have received these, some of my clients, not all, some of my clients are in businesses where effectively they're not, they have been forced to close down because they have not been considered essential businesses under the state law. So effectively, they have received this money, and all they can do with it at this point is wait until they become essential businesses, or bring back their employees and pay them effectively to do nothing, which is a difficult thing to do, because the issue becomes, if they spend the money, pay them for the 60-day period, and then at the end of the 60 days that the governor has not reopened the state for their particular business line, then effectively those people are going to go back onto unemployment, which is an issue. Other employees.
I got to interrupt you. Can
Sure.
you go over the difference of furloughing and laying off?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Furloughing, the term furloughing is not really being laid off. What it is it's basically you have to take unpaid time, but you are still an employee of the company, and you still have medical care, you still have all your benefits. You're just not actually getting paid, but you still are on the health insurance plans and other plans of the company, and that you are still an employee of the company. You're just not being paid.
Does that cover that?
Pardon me?
Does the PPP cover that?
No, the PPP doesn't cover. Well, if someone was that's a good example. If someone was furloughed and a company received PPP money, then that money could be used to bring them back. I mean, that's what this is all about, is to bring people back off of unemployment or off of furlough back into employment. Another issue that has occurred, and this is one where in lower paid jobs, positions, where people have received the PPE money and their employees refuse to go back to work. And the reason they refuse to go back to work when given the opportunity to go back to work is that the fact is that under the unemployment program that was put in for the 4-month period ending July 31st, individuals receive a flat $600 from the federal government, which is funded through the federal government through the state of Massachusetts. And on top of that, they are receiving what they're entitled to under Massachusetts unemployment rules. So you have people who are receiving much more in unemployment than they were for working.
Camille, you should get laid off. Tell them to lay you off.
Yeah.
Go under the table and or whatever. I don't think people pay under the table anymore.
No, but that's a big problem. So what is happening is that I have clients that have money that cannot get their employees to come back. The only way that they can get them to come back, in whether or not they would want to come back after doing this, is that the employer would have to go to notify the Department of Unemployment that their employee has refused to come back to work when work is available for them. Because they make more money collecting unemployment, And so once the employer does that,
the guy won't work for them anymore anyway.
They were not going to work for them anymore anyway. So it's a major catch-22 there.
What kind of businesses do you represent? Like we have a function business, and it's the gatherings that's killing us.
Right. So even I have an example of that last one where it's a very small manufacturing company, and his employees refuse to come back to work because they're doing so much better, collecting unemployment. So effectively, he is shut down. Other companies types of companies that on the larger ones is I have a large restaurant that actually does a significant amount of takeout business on a regular basis. So they do have a dining room, but so their business has not been hurt that much, and so they have received a large amount of PPP. Another company is a moving company. They surprisingly, people are still moving, and their business is quite busy, but they received PPP funding as well. Examples of companies that have received PPP but really can't do anything with the money. Driving school is one. We really, you're sitting in a car with someone and you really can't be doing that. So that's an example of a company in that situation. So where they've received money and can't do anything. Another one is in the business of repo. This is a good one. They're in the business of repossessing automobiles for credit companies. Well, there's a moratorium in place now through June 30th for repossessions. So this company received PPP money, but they cannot effectively do their business. And again, they all they can do is to bring the people back and to sit around and pay them with government money. But they can't do their jobs because repossessions have been stricken as something that can be done at this point.
Can those people call up and try to get new business for them? Would that be considered part of the PPP, like the repossession? Call places and say, we repossess.
Well, I mean, they could. I mean, they could do that, but the issue is that. They can't carry out the repossessions until after June 30th at this point.
So it sounds like there's a flaw in that requirement that the funds be used to pay employees during the 8-week period, because it's not practical for all of these employers to use it during that 8-week period for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, that is correct. I mean, I have advised people, employers, that if effectively you can't use this money to generate revenue during this period, because that's the whole idea, is to bring the people back, generate revenue for your business,
right?
But your business cannot operate at this time, then you're best to hold on to this money and use it when you are able to operate and generate revenue.
Does that mean a modification has to be made? Does that mean some kind of a tweak has to be made to the terms of this PPP money?
Well, that's a good question. That's what I was going to discuss next, is if a company cannot meet the requirement of spending the 75% of the money on payroll during the 60-day period, then what happens is effectively the total amount that has been borrowed becomes a loan. And the good thing about the loan, if there's a good thing about a loan, is the interest rate is only 1%. And it's payable, there's actually a 6-month deferment on the payment, so that the people would be commencing payment in November timeframe over, I believe, an 18-month period, because it's effectively a 24-month payback, 6 months deferred, 18 where you're actually making the payment back. So effectively, it's a very low interest rate loan, but the intent is really, not to borrow the money. The intent was to use the money so that it would be fully forgiven, and they wouldn't have to pay it back. But some people are going to be forced to pay it back just because the businesses are closed, and it doesn't make economic sense to to have people employed to do nothing, and then not knowing come June 30th whether or not they're going to be able to even open the business at that point, and then the people have to go back on unemployment. So it's a very tough situation. Of course, this is changed. This is each state is different. So states that are now opening up, where people are coming back to work, it'll be a lot easier for companies to be able to meet the 75% payroll threshold by June 30th. But, a state like Massachusetts, where most everything is going to be closed until May 18th, and then only some things gradually opened, it's going to be difficult for companies to be able to achieve the 75% level. So, for each state and wherever you're located is really going to be determined whether or not it's going to be a loan or it's going to be a forgiven because you've been able to meet the requirements.
What's happening with the shopping malls, like a strip mall where there's supposed to 10 stores and 9 of them are out? How do they probably can't pay the rent?
Yeah, well, that's
here.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too, is that there's a lot of cooperation that's been going on at least the first month, and hopefully, as we enter the month of May, between landlords and tenants. I mean, it varies from landlord to landlord. A lot of landlords have been very cooperative and understand the situations that their commercial tenants are in, as far as being able to, not open for business if they're not an essential business. Then, they're willing to work with the businesses. Some landlords aren't as forgiving on that part, and also, of course, there are changes that have occurred as far as the foreclosures on homes, and also evictions for rentals have been extended out significantly. Moratoriums on both of those by the state, so that people are assured that they're not going to be tossed out of their home as a tenant or forced into foreclosure as a homeowner. So those are issues that were addressed fairly in the beginning of this whole pandemic. So people, at least for now, know that their home is safe, and they will be working with their banks to defer these payments either to the back end of their mortgage and effectively extending their mortgages out. But the big question, of course, is how long, once everything is pretty much back to normal, or the new normal, then how effective, how quickly is the economy going to recover, and that's going to be the big question here going forward. So it's not so much what's happening in the month of May, June, July, but as we get into the fall and we get 6 months out, is the economy back up and running?
Unemployment. I think our internet connections are not that good.
Is the unemployment going to be, significantly less than today? So those are all the factors that are going to have a significant impact upon whether or not we're going to see a number of foreclosures or tenant evictions later this year.
Let me ask you this, Alan. The first wave of funding for the PPP, we heard that some of the money was, given to corporations and public firms that, really were not in the intended targets for this. I know some of them have volunteered to pay back, but not all of them. Do you have any updated information on that, and how controls have built into the second wave so that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I think that there are some of these large companies that did receive money, and part of the issue in the first wave was that the banks were only working with people initially who they had banking relationships with. That means they had depository accounts, or they had existing business loans with them. And this blocked out a number of the vast majority of small businesses from even getting into the process of having a loan approved. And actually, what has happened now is that the SBA came out with guidelines late last week. I think it was the latter part of April, that effectively say that if you are a company, no matter what size you are, and you had the opportunity to borrow money during this pandemic period without any difficulty from a bank, or you had significant cash reserves of your own, and you have received the PPP money, then you may want to reconsider whether or not you want to return that money to the SBA, because there are certain not agreements, but as part of the signing off on accepting the money, you're making certain statements as far as the fact that you need this money. And if it can be determined, or if you can self-determine that in reality you have other sources to get the money from, internal or external, and do not really need this SBA money, then the SBA has given you until May 7th, which is 2 days from now, to return all of the PPP money without any actions that would be taken by the SBA against your company. So,
I got a question too. I hate to interrupt, but
sure.
You go to the bank sites, they all say, the SBA is loaning money and this and that. I wonder if the banks are the ones that are pushing it too, and do they help make out the applications? Do they make any extra money on the service they're doing? I'm wondering if the banks can be at fault too.
Well, the banks are at fault from the standpoint that they only worked with the people that they had existing agreements with, or existing loans or banking relationships with. So definitely that meant that the people that they knew were first in line, because you have to remember that it's the bank's best interest to have their clients receive this PPP money, because by receiving this PPP money, they are effectively bolstering the business that they have lent money to, which will assure that loans that they have already outstanding from these businesses will be repaid. So it's sort of a backstop for the banks to make sure that their best clients or clients that have significant loans outstanding with them receive the PPP money, so that they will still continue to get paid their bank loans. So absolutely, the banks have a special interest. They want to make sure that their clients get first dibs at the money. So yes, the banks have been part of the issue as this part of this process. Now, as far as filling out the applications, that's very interesting, because I had one client who didn't want to fill out the application himself, wanted me to fill it out, which technically I really couldn't do, because the AICPA came out with some guidelines regarding completing documentation on these loans for clients. And the bank also said they could not fill out the document as well, because they were just the processor. They could not complete these applications. So this individual had a third party complete the application for him. So the banks really can't do that. And yes, the banks are collecting fees as part of this process, because of the fact that that they serve as the middle person, the middleman between the consumer and the SBA. So they are collecting fees as part of this process.
But believe it or not, I think we got to wind up soon.
We have 7 minutes.
How many?
7.
Yay! It's a lucky number. But I was going to point out again that this is Alan Lury, CPA, and he was with us on our first financial literacy for the school back in 9 years ago, whenever it was. So he's really out there and knows his stuff. Well, that's good. But you want to talk about, you have these 10 plans to help businesses?
The thing that you posted recently on LinkedIn.
Oh, really? I'm trying to remember where. I do post a number of things on LinkedIn regarding businesses. The major issue today with in the situation that we're in is really managing two things. One is your cash, and the most important thing is the cash flow in this environment, to manage your receivables, collect your cash as quickly as you can, to make sure that you're running as lean a business as possible with your headcount. Unfortunately, a lot of these people who have been laid off during this process, especially people over the age of 50, are going to find it a very difficult time to be able to get back into the workforce.
Oh, I got another one for you, and I hate to keep interrupting, but what advice do you have? We've been talking about businesses. What advice do you have for the small independent contractor? Maybe he just does lawns, or he's a single proprietor. He might just have him and another fellow or two fellows that they can't qualify for unemployment or these PPP loans.
Well, actually, that's a good point. Let me just mention that as we were near the end here. This is a very unusual situation where the government changed the rules for allowing self-employed individuals as well as contractors, 1099 gig contractors, because so many people today are self-employed as a 1099 contractor working for one or two companies. They have allowed them under this process to collect unemployment. So I do have a number of clients who fall under that category and have been collecting unemployment. It took a while for the state. They actually had to write some software to be able to accept these people into the system, but they are collecting unemployment right now, and those that they're so small that the PPP doesn't make sense for them. But
what if they have a rental property? Can they still qualify?
Yeah, actually, well, with the rental property, they could qualify for unemployment if they haven't gone through. If they haven't, let's say, received money for the PPP and they want to collect unemployment because of the fact that, their rental streams have decreased because they have tenants that are unable to pay, then, yeah, there are people who have done that as well, who own property and either have received. I have one client who owns substantial investment property, and under that issue of his revenue stream declining, he has received PPP money as part of that in order to pay his payroll. He actually has payroll, and so he has received that funding to cover his payroll for his employees.
I think we're just about close to ending here. I think we ought to wrap up now.
Well, you're so interesting. You're always so interesting. You're always so informative. I mean, spellbound. People that watch the show afterwards say this. He's just wonderful.
We always learn something, Alan.
Well, that's good.
I mean, we learn a lot even when things are not crazy like they are now. But things are so crazy. We don't really know what's going to happen next, whether it's the economy or the pandemic itself.
That's right.
We're trying to play in a field, some sort of a game that's changing constantly, and all the rules change along with it.
That's it. The rule. It's a very dynamic situation. As I said, every week there's some new twist coming out with how this whole PPP and the other programs have been put in place because of the fact that they realize that what they're doing or what is in the law is not what they really intended to happen, so they're making changes.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to be constantly monitoring all of these developments, which come up every single day, and you're doing a great job at it, an excellent job with it. So thank you, audience, for watching. Roberta, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, you know, thank God you don't hear people jumping out of windows, and I don't want anybody to think of doing that either.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, to our viewers, thank you for watching, and thank you, Alan, for being our guest
Thank you.
today. If you, our viewers, have any questions about all of this, we've been doing a series on the coronavirus and its impacts on the economy and on students and on health issues. So if you have any ideas about a topic that you think would be good for us to talk about on the coronavirus, please let us hear from you. We're always welcome to your feedback. Because remember, this is your show, the law, your money,
And you.
You.